First of all, HUD policies and its funding is finally recognizes that our work is really about supporting and building communities that can be sustained, and our vision goes beyond the property line and recognizes that flexibility to meet the needs of the population has to be high on the priority list where it has not been historically. Let me give you some examples of that. The Notice of Funding Availability for the Continuance of Care to Address Homelessness advises that applications needed to put a priority on veterans, and that it should tie in local schools to ensure that the educational needs of children who are homeless are being met. The Choice Neighborhoods proposal involved coordinated funding and identification of eligible communities with the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services. And other partnerships have been established with the Department of Labor for job training, with Veterans Administration for housing vouchers for homeless vets, and we're coordinating with the Department of Agriculture on rural housing programs. That didn't exist in the past. And in my view, we can't get to where we need to go, answer the questions if we focus on housing and only on housing. And clearly CRA and ALHFA get that by recognizing the emphasis on communities, and particularly the sustainability of communities, beyond just environmental, but what it really means in terms of leaving a better place for those who follow us. And so while we've broadened our focus to really reach past the property line and build on sustainable communities, we can't have that discussion if we put the focus solely on bricks and mortar and funding without serious discussion of communities and residents, because that's what we're really talking about ultimately, is communities and residents, and about how we knit something together so that it helps people move from the margins who live on the edge and looks at addressing barriers in a way of their success and self-sufficiency. And Jim's discussion about reaching out to advocates and understanding that we all have the same goal in partnerships and figuring out how to make that work. I mean, this whole issue of thinking about equity in what we do, I think, is critical to our success and ultimately the support of the communities that we serve. And HUD's Deputy Secretary Sims said recently, and I think said it really well, he said, look, we're going to convert zip codes into addresses, not life determinants. And we've all seen too much of that. So now HUD is catching up with the demonstrated best practices, and we're doing it as fast as we can. We brought on a lot of very talented people, more from California's experience than anywhere else. We have Assistant Secretary Mercedes Marquez for Community Planning and Development, John Trasvina for Fair Housing, Rafael Bostic for Policy Development and Research, and of course Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multifamily, Carol Galante from Bridge Housing. So California is way too important to all of this. Today California accounts for more than $1 billion of the $13 billion in HUD Recovery Act funds. I know there are people who think they didn't get enough, but that's pretty amazing. And no one else even comes close. And when HUD and Treasury looked at the needs of those states hardest hit by foreclosure crisis, California was awarded $700 million of the $2 billion in that fund, a full third of the funding. Again, no one else comes even close. But California is important in other ways that it's just as important, if not more important, than our funding. And that is that you in this room have been the lab where new approaches have been tested, refined, and in many cases put into action. So, I think you've all led and been able to demonstrate effective ways to do that. Now, I know you're also interested in some of the specifics involved in these changes, so I'm going to turn to those. I didn't want to do a PowerPoint presentation because you sort of saw one this morning, but I just want to kind of run through some of the programs and their impact on the state. So the Neighborhood Stabilization Program provided $149 million in grants to 44 California communities. And altogether, HUD has awarded, over $1 billion in neighborhood stabilization grants to 85 communities through 3 award announcements. And that means California received about $1 out of every 6. Funding for NSP3 will be available shortly. We published a notice of fund availability on October 19th with instructions for the grantees on the formulas and the documents and all of that. The applications are due in early March 1st. And sustainable communities is the term for HUD's approach to look past that property line I've been talking about when we address housing needs and look at what elements are needed for communities to sustain themselves. And we recently basically awarded $100 million in funds for the sustainable communities. The response to this NOFA was unbelievable. We received, so many applications, and I was fortunate to be able to be part of the evaluation process. And these were, for the most part, very high quality applications, really hard to make the choices. And the grant selections were announced just a little over a week ago for the Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grants. California State University with the Fresno Foundation, Central Valley Consortium of Local Governments, and CSU received $4 million, and the Sacramento Area Council of Governments received $1.5 million. In the Tiger II Community Challenge Planning Grants, which are joint grants with Department of Transportation, EPA, and USDA, those were also announced. The California Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles, or the Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles, received $2.25 million, and the City of Santa Monica about $652,000 in those Tiger II, the Community Challenge. And then in Tiger II grant awards, the City of Oakland received $2 million, and the San Mateo County Transit District about a little over $1 million. So these grants all had ambitious goals, which were really to remove these bureaucratic barriers among federal programs and create more coordination with state and local governments, and this is where the opportunities for the partnerships of your agencies fit in, and really to leverage the resources, lessons learned, and create real change on the ground. For CDBG, the FY 2011 funding outlook seems favorable. The amount in the House passed bill and the Senate reported bill is pretty close to what was provided in 2010. Right now we're in a continuing resolution. We hope that that will go to some kind of probably an omnibus bill adoption after the first of the year. And there's not any major planning changes or policy changes in CDBG, a lot more focus on technical assistance and potential changes for the consolidated planning process, but pretty much the same as what you've known. This is a really interesting year for HOME. It's the 20th anniversary of the HOME program, and we're anticipating the 1 millionth home assisted will be completed sometime near the end of 2011. Homelessness is front and center at HUD now, with a big focus on performance and outcomes, and a willingness to really kind of make some I think difficult decisions about how we strategize around this. For the first time, we're actually talking about ending homelessness as opposed to just sort of dealing with people who are on the streets and not sort of fundamentally having a vision that you can address this problem. It isn't something that we have to accept as being the way a certain group in the population lives. So the technical assistance is being offered across programs, again breaking down those silos. Strategic planning going on at HUD is going on with the Interagency Council on Homelessness, which includes a number of federal agencies. So, HUD programs are not going to solve this problem alone. And so we're working with the Veterans Administration on vouchers for veterans in particular. And I don't know how many of you might have heard the recent NPR story last week that said veterans coming back from Iraq are becoming homeless in half the time of veterans who came back from other wars. So we're going to have enormous challenges ahead of us. They're coming back in worse physical condition and with severe mental problems in some instances. And I think this is going to be something we're all going to have to figure out how to address working together. We're also, one of the things in the homeless area, we're working with HHS on several initiatives about homeless families, and the work with the Department of Veterans Affairs is really, I think, shown how that agency, which started out slow, is really ramping up and doing a great job. So real, I think, opportunities there. There's also a lot more effort on capacity building within HUD, really looking at how do we help cities and states and our nonprofit grantees manage funds for real impact and where they can be efficient and effective. And how many of you primarily know HUD as a compliance agency? Come in and check the box, right? Are you doing it right? And I think that we're really moving away from that. And the Neighborhood Stabilization Program was really probably the first real on-the-ground experiment with providing technical assistance in a very different way, where, looking at, how can we help with individual needs assessments, doing problem-solving clinics, putting up websites with tools for people to share. So it turned out to be so successful that I think we're going to probably use this model as we work through other grant programs, so that as we do formula grants in particular, we provide the kind of assistance that really makes a difference. So on the planning and accountability, as I mentioned earlier, there is really a new focus on performance and outcomes. The Secretary did a lot of this kind of work in his, built into his work when he was in New York. He's very attuned to you get what you measure. And you know, if he's not satisfied with the calculations, he's great with the HP calculator himself. I mean, so it's a real pleasure to see somebody who can dive into the numbers in the way that he does, and you know, manage to figure out, you know, what are the key issues we need to be focused on, and how do we address those and find real solutions. So when I started my remarks, I talked about, you know, at the beginning about our shared timeline, and HUD's going to be almost 50 years old in the next couple of years. But there's an additional point that I want to leave with you. You know, we face hard times in this nation. We talked about this at lunch. And too often, hard times bring about hard attitudes. And what was NIMBYism in the past really now appears to be hostility toward programs that meet the needs of communities and low-income neighbors. And I think you probably know that's true. And what was a sense that we share in a world that includes all of us becomes a desire to jealously guard against sharing resources out of the fear that the result will be less for me personally. And you know that's true. And what was a vision of a future that we could make is traded down to a daydream about once was, and you know that's true. And after you've considered it all, there's something more important than any of that. And that's because you and your agencies exist because you know we have within us the power to make things better than they are. You know that we can find a way to make things better without leaving people or communities behind. And you know that, and you've proven that project by project, person by person, community by community. We are not the cities and communities that we were 50 years ago. And the odds for change then were so much greater than they are today with many of the issues that we're facing. We are always on the side of helping communities to overcome barriers and achieve success. And you've all been equal to that task. More than anything, that's really the foundation of our partnership, the basis for how we'll move together to continue creating changes and benefits for our communities. And I and the Department of Housing and Urban Development look forward to deepening and strengthening that partnership, because together I know that we can build on the successes that we've had to date. So thank you very much.